Solve this equation and I'll marry you.
Solve this equation and I'll marry you. Professor Eva Gray wrote the impossible formula across the board, her laughter echoing through the lecture hall. The sophomore calculus class erupted in nervous giggles. She drew another layer of complexity: nested integrals, differential operators, abstract variables that seemed designed to mock human comprehension. Eva smiled, that cold, intellectual smile she'd perfected over 17 years of academic domination. She knew no one would dare attempt it. The equation was intentionally unsolvable, a demonstration of the limits of undergraduate mathematics. She turned to face the classroom, arms crossed, expecting silence. But Adam Murphy didn't laugh. The janitor, pushing his cart outside the partially open door, stopped dead. His hand froze on the handle. Through the doorway, he could see the equation clearly. His eyes tracked across it once, twice. Without thinking, he stepped inside. The classroom fell silent. 200 pounds of lean muscle in a faded maintenance uniform, dark hair streaked with grey, approaching the board. Eva's expression shifted, from amusement to confusion, to something approaching dread as she watched him take the chalk from her fingers. He worked for 40 seconds, 32 steps of pure mathematical elegance. The solution flowed across the board like poetry. Perfect, impeccable, absolutely correct. Eva felt her stomach drop as she watched those hands, calloused from mopping, scarred from years of labor, produce mathematics that belonged in a doctoral thesis, not in a janitor's grip. But before we find out what happens next, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. And drop a comment below. Tell me in the comments which profession surprises you most when you discover someone's hidden genius. Which would you choose, the prestigious career or the honest life? Now let me tell you how Adam ended up here, cleaning floors at Hartwell University while his mind held secrets worth millions. This story goes back further than you'd think, to a moment when everything changed, when a choice was made that would echo through years and reshape two lives completely. The story had to go back further. Eva Gray had spent the last decade building a life designed to be beyond reproach. Her parents were both academics, her mother a renowned physicist, her father a mathematics professor at Berkeley. Growing up in their household meant intellectual achievement wasn't just encouraged, it was oxygen. You breathed it or you suffocated. By age 12, Eva had exhausted her high school's mathematics curriculum. By 16, she'd published her first paper on computational geometry. By 22, she'd earned her PhD from MIT, and her parents finally seemed proud. But pride from achievement proved hollow. She pivoted into entrepreneurship, founding a tech startup called Grayscale Solutions with 2 MIT classmates. The company developed artificial intelligence algorithms for financial prediction. Within 5 years, they'd sold to a major investment firm for $250 million. Eva became wealthy beyond her wildest childhood fantasies. More importantly, she became unavoidable. Her name appeared in Forbes, in Technology Review, on panels about women in STEM. The success had happened so fast, it had left her dizzy. One day she was debugging code in a cramped office with exposed brick and failing air conditioning. The next, she was signing acquisition papers in rooms with mahogany furniture and lawyers who billed by the minute. Her share of the sale had been $87 million. She'd received the wire transfer confirmation on her phone while sitting in traffic, and she'd felt nothing, not elation, not relief, just a hollow sense of confirmation that money was real, and she had a lot of it. She'd taken a month off. She'd traveled to Japan, to Iceland, to the Caribbean. She'd stayed in 5-star hotels and eaten at restaurants where the chef's vision was more important than the diner's taste buds. She'd slept with a man she'd met in Tokyo, someone beautiful and temporary, who'd wanted nothing from her except her body for 2 nights. She'd realized, lying in his arms, that this was the closest she'd come to connection in years, with a stranger who would never know her name. When she returned to Boston, she'd accepted an offer to become an executive advisor for the investment firm, a position that paid $900,000 a year for roughly 6 hours of actual work weekly. It was absurd. It was also the clearest possible indication that she'd achieved everything and accomplished nothing. Then she made a decision that baffled everyone around her. She took a position as a mathematics professor at Hartwell University, one of the smallest, least prestigious institutions in the state. The salary was embarrassing compared to what she could command in the private sector. The prestige was negligible. When her mother called after hearing the news, her voice had contained genuine concern. "Ava, are you having some kind of crisis? This is beneath you." Her father had been worse. He'd asked if she was depressed, if she'd considered medication, if she was perhaps having a mental breakdown. Academia was for people who couldn't make it in the real world, he'd said. People who lacked the ambition to build something. Academia was for people who were satisfied with small accomplishments and smaller paychecks. But Eva understood something her mother and father never had. Power wasn't in accumulating money or accolades. Power was in control. Control over minds. Control over the narrative. At Hartwell, in her classroom, she was a goddess. Students arrived nervous and left transformed, not by knowledge, but by her presence. She could make a brilliant student doubt their intelligence with a glance. She could make a mediocre student work until their eyes bled. She had constructed a perfect system where her superiority was indisputable. She held their futures in her hands through grades and recommendations. She shaped their self-perception through the harshness or kindness of her assessment. She decided in her classroom who was smart enough and who wasn't. It was intoxicating. It was also the most honest thing she'd ever done, admitting that what she really wanted wasn't to advance human knowledge. What she wanted was to make other people feel as insignificant as she secretly was. She lived in a converted loft downtown, all concrete and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. She had carefully cultivated friendships with other successful women, a surgeon, a venture capitalist, an attorney, who served as mirrors reflecting her own ambition and brilliance. She dated occasionally, choosing men she could dominate intellectually and then discard when they became boring. She owned a Tesla and a vintage motorcycle. She ran marathons in under 3 hours. She was, by any objective measure, winning at life. The problem was that winning felt like losing. This realization had crept up on Eva during quiet moments, driving to work, sitting alone in her loft on Friday nights, standing in the shower at 6 in the morning. There was a grinding hollowness inside her that achievement couldn't fill. No matter what she accomplished, there was always something higher, always someone doing better, always a way she could be more. She'd considered therapy. She'd considered meditation apps and antidepressants. She'd tried pushing harder in every direction, assuming that if she could just reach some final summit, the emptiness would transform into fulfillment. But there was no summit. There was only the endless, exhausting climb. So she buried the feeling under work. She threw herself into building curriculum innovations. She published papers. She won the university's Distinguished Teaching Award, which she accepted with a speech about the privilege of molding young minds. She read everything: philosophy, neuroscience, literature, searching for the answer to a question she couldn't quite articulate. On the morning Adam Murphy was hired to work the night shift as a custodian at Hartwell, Ava didn't notice. She had no reason to notice the man pushing a cart through the hallways at 10 p.m., cleaning the spaces where professors had spent the day demonstrating their intellectual superiority. Janitors were invisible at universities. They existed in the gaps, in the after hours, in the moments when important people weren't looking. Adam Murphy had chosen invisibility deliberately. 5 years earlier, he'd been a different person. He'd been Dr. Adam Murphy, a research scientist at Blackwell Dynamics, a cutting-edge biotech firm where the work could reshape human medicine. He'd had an office on the 23rd floor of a glass building in downtown Boston. He'd made $340,000 a year. He'd been engaged to be married. The view from his office had showed the harbor, and on clear days, he could see 3 islands in the distance. He'd spent more time looking out that window than doing actual work. His colleagues thought he was contemplative. He was actually terrified that he was moving towards something significant, and that significant things could only end in disaster or failure or a version of success that tasted like ashes. The engagement had been with Jennifer Chen, a venture capitalist who understood ambition as a language. They'd met at a conference, had intense conversations about changing the world through innovation and capital, had fallen into something that resembled love, or at least resembled what love looked like when 2 people were too busy to examine it closely. Jennifer had the kind of beauty that opened doors and the intellect to walk through them without needing anyone to hold them. She'd been his equal in all the ways he'd been trained to value: intelligence, ambition, credentials, earning potential. Their relationship was strategic in the best possible way. They understood each other without needing to be understood. The wedding had been planned for June. His mother had been thrilled about Jennifer. His sister Sarah had been politely skeptical, the way she was about everything Adam did in Boston. Sarah had asked him 3 weeks before the engagement fell apart, "Do you love her, or do you love the idea of her?" Adam hadn't known how to answer. He'd thought loving the idea of someone was basically the same as loving them. He'd discovered too late that he'd been wrong. But in March, something had broken. Not in Adam's relationship, though that would follow. The break happened in his research lab. Adam had been working on a protein delivery system designed to target and destroy cancer cells while leaving healthy tissue untouched. For 3 years, he'd been pushing toward a breakthrough. The preliminary trials looked promising. His team had 20 researchers reporting to him. The company had invested $12 million. Then Adam discovered a problem. A subtle one, hidden in the statistical analysis. When the data was re-examined with fresh eyes, a particular marker indicated that the treatment was causing secondary liver damage in 5% of trial subjects. 5% of a large population was significant. 5% of cancer patients was thousands of people who would trade their tumor for cirrhosis. He'd discovered it on a Thursday at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, running through the numbers obsessively. His hands had been shaking as he verified the calculations. Once, twice, 3 times. The answer didn't change. 5%. Predictable. Real. He'd sat in the darkened lab, staring at the monitors, and felt the first genuine moment of fear he'd experienced since his PhD defense. This wasn't the fear of failure. This was the fear of success. Success that would harm the people it was meant to save. Success with hidden costs. Success with blood on his hands. He hadn't slept. He'd showered, dressed, and walked into his supervisor's office as soon as he arrived at work, carrying the documentation with shaking hands. Adam brought the data to his supervisor, Dr. Kenneth Walsh, a man in his 50s who'd made the transition from research to administration and had mastered the language of corporate euphemism along the way. He expected them to adjust the approach, modify the delivery mechanism, find a way to eliminate the liver damage while preserving the cancer-fighting properties. Instead, he got a response that had shattered everything he believed about his professional world. "How confident is this analysis?" his supervisor had asked, not looking up from his email. "Very confident. We'll need to document it, submit to the FDA. Can we argue the other way?" Emphasize the efficacy data instead? Adam had stared at him. The liver damage is real, but not completely certain. Statistical noise, maybe. Look, we're 6 months from phase 3 trials, 6 months from launching something that could help thousands of people. Are you really willing to delay that over data we're not sure about? Over 5%? Dr. Walsh's tone had been dismissive, the way you might dismiss a child's concern about shadows in the closet. We have quarterly earnings projections. We have investors expecting ROI. We have a board breathing down my neck about when we're going to have something to show them. 5% is acceptable risk in the pharmaceutical industry. 5% is, frankly, extraordinary safety profile for a cancer treatment. 5% is 300 people out of 6,000, Adam had said, in the phase 3 trials alone, and that doesn't account for how many might be affected in phase 4 and beyond. Maybe the numbers shift when we scale. Maybe the liver markers resolve with adjusted dosing. Maybe it's not as bad as you think. You're catastrophizing based on preliminary data. Adam was sure. He was completely sure. He'd checked the analysis himself 3 times, then asked a colleague to check it. The liver damage was real, predictable, disqualifying. He understood, staring at Dr. Walsh's face, that sure wasn't enough. Sure was just one person's interpretation of data. Sure didn't count when corporate revenue was on the line. He'd refused to participate in downplaying the data. He'd written a memo outlining his concerns, documented everything with excruciating care, prepared to go to the FDA if necessary. The memo had been thorough and devastating. 3 pages of cold analysis demonstrating that the treatment was unsafe and that Blackwell Dynamics knew it. He'd sent it to Dr. Walsh first, as protocol demanded. He'd copied Jennifer, who received it at her venture capital firm, and called him immediately. She'd been furious, not at the company, but at him. Do you understand what you're doing? You're throwing away your career. You're throwing away our future. You're throwing away the IPO that was supposed to make us both wealthy beyond what we could have imagined. And for what? For this idealistic nonsense about 5% of patients who might have liver problems that might resolve with dosing adjustment. He'd tried to explain. She'd hung up on him. 2 weeks later, he was fired. The official reason was lack of collaborative spirit and concern about morale. His supervisor, in the meeting where he was terminated, had been almost apologetic. You're a talented researcher, Adam, but you're not a team player. And in this industry, you have to be able to think bigger picture. You have to understand that you can't let perfect be the enemy of good. We're doing this with or without you. You made your choice to not be part of something great. I'm sorry. His access to the lab was revoked. His email was disabled. His name was removed from the office directory before lunch. By dinner, Jennifer's engagement ring had been returned via courier to his apartment, along with a brief text message. I can't be with someone who doesn't understand how the world works. He'd sat on his apartment floor that evening, surrounded by a life that had been systematically dismantled, and understood that he'd been naive. He'd believed the system was set up to catch mistakes like this. He'd believed that ethical concerns would be taken seriously. He'd believed that doing the right thing would be rewarded, or at least wouldn't result in total professional destruction. He'd been catastrophically wrong. The wedding didn't happen in June. It didn't happen at all. For a year, Adam had tried to recover professionally. He'd sent out his resume, done interviews, been told repeatedly that he had a reputation problem. Word had traveled through the biotech world like a virus that destroyed careers instead of cells. He was difficult. He was a whistleblower type. He was not a team player. He was someone who couldn't see the bigger picture. These were professional death sentences in an industry built on collaboration and trust, where collaboration meant staying silent and trust meant not questioning authority. Each rejection email had felt like a small death. Each interview, where he could sense the interviewer mentally crossing him off the list, had been a moment of acute humiliation. He'd spent 15 years building credentials, earning degrees, publishing papers, establishing himself as a rising star in his field, and it had all been wiped out by one decision to do the right thing. The cruelty of it still took his breath away sometimes. By month 14, he'd burned through his savings. His apartment lease ended. He'd moved into a studio, then a shared house. He'd taken a job as a research technician at a smaller firm, making $90,000 a year. Then that firm had been bought by Blackwell Dynamics, and suddenly his old supervisor had power over him again. He quit before he could be fired. Adam had spent 3 months unemployed. He'd walked through the Boston winter in a coat held together by will and duct tape. He'd seen his own future in the eyes of homeless men, asking for spare change. He'd understood for the first time how easily a life could collapse. Then he'd received a text from his sister. "I found something. Come home. I'm serious. You need to come home." Home was Millbrook, a small city in New Hampshire where he'd grown up. His sister Sarah ran a community center and had never left, had built a life there, had seemed content in a way Adam had never understood. He'd left when he was 18, desperate to escape a place he'd seen as provincial and small. He'd spent 20 years proving he was too smart for Millbrook, too ambitious, too destined for greatness. Greatness had rejected him. He'd moved back to Millbrook and gotten the custodial job at Hartwell University through Sarah's connections. The pay was adequate. The work was mindless, which Adam discovered he needed. 8 hours a night of mopping, cleaning, organizing, work that was simple and complete. When he left at 6 in the morning, the work he'd done was visible and finished. No ambiguity, no ethical questions, no lives hanging in the balance. He'd rented a small house on the edge of town. He lived alone. He read constantly, philosophy, history, literature, things that had nothing to do with advancement or achievement. He'd found a kind of peace that had eluded him when he was important. 3 months into this new life, he met Marcus Wheeler, another custodian on the night shift. Marcus was in his 50s, had worked at Hartwell for 23 years, and possessed a philosophical approach to janitorial work that Adam found oddly moving. Marcus treated the university buildings like they were temples. Every window he cleaned mattered. Every hallway he maintained was a small act of care for the community. "People think this work is invisible," Marcus had told Adam over coffee in the custodial break room, "but it's not. This work makes the place where thinking happens. We're the foundation. We're the quiet thing that lets brilliant people be brilliant." Adam had felt something shift hearing this. For his entire adult life, he'd measured value through achievement, through impact, through being the smartest person in the room. And that measurement system had destroyed him. Marcus had never wanted to be the smartest person. He'd wanted to be the person who made it possible for smart people to do their work. There was something revolutionary in that reversal. Over the next 2 years, Adam had built a different kind of life, one that surprised him with its meaning. He'd developed real friendships with the other custodial staff, conversations that happened in the break room over terrible coffee, on the job between cleaning tasks, at neighborhood bars where they'd gather on Friday nights. These weren't the kind of friendships that happened in his former life, the strategic relationships with colleagues designed to advance careers. These were real. People who checked on him when he was quiet, people who celebrated small victories without needing them to be impressive. He'd become close with Marcus, who'd taken on an almost paternal role, the father figure Adam's own father had never managed to be. Marcus taught him that there was honor in honest work, that the invisible people keeping institutions running were more essential than anyone in corner offices realized. Marcus told him stories about his own life, the teaching job he'd left to support his family, the dreams he'd deferred to be responsible, the peace he'd found in accepting that a good life didn't have to be a famous one. He'd volunteered at the community center with his sister, helping with after-school programs where kids from difficult circumstances came for homework help and meals, and the simple gift of being around adults who cared. He'd found something there that research never gave him, direct, immediate evidence that his presence mattered. A third grader struggling with math, who suddenly understood because Adam explained it patiently. A middle schooler who'd given up on school until Adam showed her she was actually smart. A high schooler who was one bad decision away from complete destruction until Adam's mentorship helped her see another path. These weren't published discoveries. They wouldn't make his career. But they were real transformations, real lives changed by simple human attention. He'd adopted a dog from the shelter, a German Shepherd mix named Beethoven, who'd been abused and abandoned by previous owners. The dog had severe behavioral problems at first: fear aggression, resource guarding, a deep distrust of human touch. Adam recognized something of himself in Beethoven. The dog had been hurt by people and had decided never to trust again. Slowly, over months, Adam had shown Beethoven that not all humans would hurt him, that touch could be gentle, that love existed. Watching Beethoven learn to trust again was watching his own healing reflected back at him in fur and tail wags. He'd learned to cook, not to impress anyone with elaborate dishes or sophisticated palates, but because feeding himself and others mattered. Because the simple act of making a meal for someone you care about was one of the most profound expressions of love available to humans. He'd spend Sunday afternoons preparing food, nothing fancy, just good, honest meals that he'd bring to the community center, to Marcus, to his sister. He realized that this was how humans connected before we invented achievement metrics and status symbols. We fed each other. We made sure everyone had enough. We gathered around tables and called it communion. He'd also read every research paper his former field published. He kept current with the state of cancer medicine, the progress that had been made since he'd left. And 6 months ago, he'd read something that had torn open the wound he'd spent 2 years carefully stitching closed. The cancer treatment he'd refused to let be falsified had been approved anyway, without his warnings, without proper testing for the liver damage he'd documented. 200 patients had received the treatment in Phase 3 trials. 48 of those patients had developed severe liver damage. 3 had died from complications. Adam had sat in his bedroom, the article open on his laptop, and felt the full weight of his decision collapse on him. He could have stopped this. He should have stopped this. Instead, he'd chosen to protect his career, which had seemed like the important thing at the time. When career protection failed, he'd hidden. He could have gone to the FDA independently. He could have leaked the data. He could have fought. Instead, he'd quit and disappeared. And now 3 people were dead because of his silence. It was during this period of renewed despair that he'd started spending more time at Hartwell University. The walking, the maintaining of the spaces, the quiet work of care. It was the only thing that calmed the spiraling guilt. And he'd developed a strange habit of looking in through classroom doors, watching professors teach, feeling something close to envy, mixed with contempt. These were the people who got to matter. These were the ones whose ideas reached the world, whose insights shaped young minds. And Adam, who had worked in the highest-level research facilities, who had held the future of medicine in his hands, was pushing a mop through their hallways. That's the moment Eva Gray had noticed him. Not when he solved her equation, but 2 weeks before. He'd been outside her office, cleaning the hallway, when she'd come out carrying a stack of papers and a cold coffee cup. She'd been talking on her phone, her voice sharp with intellectual dismissal. "I don't care if he's been published. That methodology is fundamentally flawed. Cite the Schwartzman paper on p-hacking in your rejection letter. Make him feel stupid." She'd brushed past Adam without seeing him, the way you might brush past a chair. Adam had looked at the hallway where she'd walked, at the space where she'd inhabited the air with such complete confidence in her own superiority, and felt something almost like recognition. He'd been that person, that dismissive, that certain, that convinced that intelligence granted you the right to make others feel small. He'd never wanted to be that person again, but she'd caught him because he couldn't look away. When Eva turned around to throw her coffee cup in the hallway trash, she'd seen him standing there. Something in his expression, not resentful, not angry, just deeply sad, had made her pause. For a moment, across the gulf of their different worlds, they'd looked at each other. Then Adam had returned to his mopping, and Eva had continued to her office, but something had been established. Recognition, maybe, or just the slight friction that happens when two people sense something true about each other. 2 weeks later, he was solving her impossible equation. The moment the chalk left his hand, Adam understood his mistake. He'd stepped from the shadows into the light, and the light would burn. Eva was staring at the solution with an expression somewhere between fascination and horror. The classroom was silent. No one moved. "Who are you?" Eva asked quietly. Adam turned. He met her eyes. In that moment, he could see her calculating, analyzing, trying to process the data that didn't fit her model of the world. Janitors weren't brilliant mathematicians. Brilliant mathematicians wore suits and taught at prestigious universities. The equation itself was a contradiction wrapped in human flesh. "Adam," he said simply, "I'm just the custodian." "You're not just anything." Eva set down the remaining chalk. "Where did you study?" "Boston College for my undergraduate, MIT for my PhD. The class erupted in shocked whispers. One student, a pre-med who'd been struggling, looked devastated, as if the revelation that the janitor had more credentials than the professor somehow diminished the entire enterprise. Eva ignored the noise. "PhD in what?" "Biochemistry. I was doing cancer research." "Was?" Adam felt the weight of that question. Everyone in the classroom was watching. He could lie. He could deflect. He could say he'd changed fields, decided he preferred the contemplative life, chose meaning over money. Some of these things were even true. Instead, he told the truth. "I made ethical compromises I couldn't live with. I quit. Now I clean floors." Eva's expression shifted. Something in her that had been closed opened slightly. "That's either the most principled thing I've heard all year, or the most self-destructive. Come see me in my office during office hours, Tuesday at 2. She turned back to the board and erased his solution, replacing it with a different problem. Class continued, but the damage was done. The equation had been written, the mystery had been established, and a woman who'd spent a decade believing she understood exactly how the world worked had just discovered something that didn't fit the model. Tuesday at 2, Adam stood outside her office, terrified. He'd considered not showing up. He'd considered transferring to a different custodial shift, finding a different university, anywhere but here. The exposure was excruciating. He'd built his life on invisibility, and now Eva Gray was going to dismantle it. Her office was exactly what he expected. Floor-to-ceiling bookcases, awards and certificates, a desk that overlooked the university's oldest quadrangle, natural light, the kind of space that announced intelligence and achievement. Eva sat behind her desk, a position designed to reinforce hierarchy. She was wearing a charcoal suit and the kind of focused attention that made people nervous. "Why are you really cleaning floors at Hartwell?" she asked without preamble. "Because I needed to disappear." "From who?" "Myself, mostly." Eva leaned back in her chair. "Tell me the whole story, and don't edit for my benefit. I want the actual truth." So Adam told her. The research, the discovery, The attempt to do the right thing, the betrayal, the blacklisting, the depression, the feeling that he'd wasted his life. He talked about his work at Blackwell Dynamics, the cancer treatment, the lives that had been damaged by his silence. Eva listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You think you failed," she said finally, "but you didn't. You made a choice between your career and your integrity. Your career lost. That's not failure, that's success in the most important test there is. 3 people died. 3 people died because the system failed them, because a company prioritized profit over safety. That's not your guilt to carry alone." Adam wanted to believe this. He wanted to let go of the weight he'd been hauling around for 2 years. But belief and weight didn't work that way. You couldn't think yourself out of guilt. You had to live yourself through it. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Why do you care?" Eva stood and walked to the window. She looked out at the quadrangle, at the students walking between classes, at the place where she'd built her own careful structure of superiority. "Because I'm lost," she said quietly. "And I think you might be the only person I know who's been found." This was the first time Adam saw Eva Gray as something other than a symbol. She was a woman in a charcoal suit, standing in front of a window, admitting vulnerability. The sight of it broke his heart a little. Over the next 3 months, they developed an unlikely friendship that surprised everyone who heard about it. Eva would spend her office hours asking Adam questions about ethics and meaning, and whether intelligence was worth anything if it didn't serve humanity. Adam would listen and respond carefully, afraid of hurting her, afraid of making her feel the way she'd made countless students feel, small and stupid and less than. He was acutely aware that she was searching for something, that beneath her brilliance there was a hunger for meaning that her achievements couldn't satisfy. Their first coffee was awkward. They'd met at a small cafe off campus, and Eva had arrived with a notebook, treating it like an academic meeting rather than a simple conversation. She'd asked him direct questions. "Did you always believe in doing the right thing, or did you learn that through experience?" Adam had been honest. "I learned it the hard way, by destroying my life-choosing principle over pragmatism." "Do you regret it?" she'd asked. "Yes and no. The regret isn't about making the ethical choice. The regret is that I wasn't smart enough, brave enough, or resourceful enough to make the ethical choice without destroying myself. I should have found another way." Eva had closed her notebook then. There is no other way when the system is designed to punish people who tell the truth. You did the best you could with the resources you had. That's all anyone can ever do. The conversations happened in her office, but they extended beyond it. Eva found herself inviting Adam to coffee regularly. They'd sit in that same cafe, and the conversations became less academic and more genuine. Adam found himself reading the papers she recommended, not to impress her, but because the ideas genuinely interested him. One book she gave him was by a philosopher named Martha Nussbaum, about how intelligence and wisdom are different capacities. He'd read it in 2 nights. They talked about philosophy and literature and the nature of happiness. They discussed whether ambition was a virtue or a disease. Adam suggested it might be both, a virtue if it served something beyond yourself, a disease if it served only your own advancement. Eva had disagreed at first, then gradually came to see his point. "I've spent my entire life thinking about how to be more successful. Never once did I ask myself what I was trying to succeed at, or why, or whether being successful at the wrong things was worse than failing at good things." They examined the difference between being brilliant and being wise. Adam had strong opinions about this. Brilliant people can solve problems. Wise people know which problems are worth solving. Brilliant people can dominate conversations. Wise people know when to listen. Brilliant people climb mountains because they're there. Wise people ask whether the mountain is calling them, or if they're just compulsively climbing because they don't know how to be still. He discovered that Eva was brilliant in the way that virtuosos are brilliant, perfectly trained, technically flawless, and utterly hollow at the center. She could solve any mathematical problem, manipulate any system, navigate any intellectual challenge with the grace of someone who'd spent her entire life perfecting her craft. But the problems she cared about most couldn't be solved through intellect alone. How do you make achievement feel like anything other than empty? How do you love when you're terrified of losing? How do you trust when you've spent your life proving that trust is for people not smart enough to protect themselves? How do you live in a way that matters beyond the accolades? Eva discovered that Adam wasn't hiding anymore, though he carried the past like a weight that never fully lifted. She discovered that he laughed easily at absurdities and small ironies, that he thought about things from angles she'd never considered, that he had a capacity for human connection that came from deep wells she'd never even known existed inside herself. He was kind, not from weakness, but from strength, from choosing to care about people he could never intellectually dominate or impress with his credentials. He had learned something profound that Eva was only beginning to understand, that worth isn't measured by achievement or publications or awards, that value doesn't come from being the smartest person in the room or climbing the highest mountain, that a life well lived is often quiet and unrecognized by the world, but deeply recognized by the people who matter most. He'd learned that legacy isn't what they write about you in Forbes or academic journals. Legacy is how you treat people when no one important is watching. Legacy is the life you model for your daughter. Legacy is the researcher you save from suicide. Legacy is showing up again and again and choosing the harder path because it's the right path. One afternoon in her office, Eva broke down. It wasn't dramatic or painful. She simply stopped talking mid-sentence, and tears began streaming down her face. Adam had been explaining some concept from a philosophy book, and she had suddenly understood that everything she'd been chasing her entire life was fundamentally hollow. All the credentials, all the money, all the recognition, none of it had ever made her happy. None of it had ever made her feel like she mattered in the way that standing in Adam's presence made her feel like she mattered. "I don't know how to not be this person," she said, gesturing at her office, at the awards on her walls, at the life she'd carefully constructed. "I don't know how to be anyone else." Adam sat beside her and didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer platitudes or solutions. He simply held her hand and said, "You don't have to be anyone else. You just have to become more human. And you're already doing that. You're doing it right now with me." They began meeting outside of the university. Adam would take her to the park where he walked Beethoven. They'd sit on a bench overlooking the water, and Eva would watch the dog play with other dogs, following some simple logic of joy and friendship that transcended species. She watched Adam interact with the other dog owners, genuinely interested in their lives, asking questions not to demonstrate her intelligence but to understand their experience. She realized she'd never done this with anyone. She'd never been curious about people just for the sake of knowing them better. Adam invited Eva to community dinners, where his sister's community center served meals to people experiencing homelessness. Ava's first instinct was to refuse. What would she do there? What could she possibly contribute? But Adam said something that shifted everything. "You don't have to be smart here. You just have to be present. You just have to see people and remember that they're real." So she came, and she served soup. And she listened to stories from people whose lives had been destroyed by circumstances, bad choices, terrible luck. And she didn't try to solve their problems or demonstrate that her intelligence could have prevented their situations. She simply bore witness to their humanity. By the end of the evening, Eva had cried 3 times, not from sadness exactly, but from some deep recognition of how much she'd been missing by only engaging with people through the lens of intellect. "This is what I needed," she whispered to Adam as they were leaving. "Not someone who was smart like me. Someone who could teach me how to be human." Adam kissed her then, for the first time. It wasn't a movie moment. It was simple and genuine, a kiss that felt like coming home. Neither of them had planned it. It emerged naturally from weeks of deepening connection, of 2 people realizing they were healing each other simply by being present to each other's pain. The turning point came during a faculty dinner in Eva's loft. She'd invited Adam to come as her guest, which had created a scandal of small proportions among Hartwell's administrators. What was she thinking, inviting the custodian? It was inappropriate. It was confusing. It muddied the water between professional and personal. Eva had invited him anyway. The dinner was a misery for Adam. Other professors arrived in designer clothes and drove expensive cars. They talked about their research with the kind of certainty that only comes from never being genuinely challenged. Someone asked Adam what he did, and when he said he was a custodian, they'd smiled politely and turned to talk to someone more important. But then someone mentioned the cancer treatment Adam had refused to participate in. A man named Dr. Chen, no relation to Jennifer, but the coincidence was bitter anyway, had been excited about it. "They're launching Phase 4 trials next month. It's going to be one of the most important cancer treatments of the decade. 30% efficacy rate." "What's the adverse effect profile?" Adam had asked quietly. Dr. Chen had waved a hand. "Minimal. Some minor liver markers in early trials, but they adjusted the dosing protocol. Should be fine." Adam had felt Eva watching him. He'd seen the calculation happening in her face. She was beginning to understand that the things he'd said about the treatment weren't abstract principles. They were about real bodies, real suffering, real people who would be damaged in the name of progress. "Did you verify the adjustment?" Adam asked. "The liver markers, they don't disappear with dosing. They're inherent to the mechanism of action." "How would you know that?" Dr. Chen had asked dismissively. "Because I designed the treatment," Adam said, "and I documented exactly why it wasn't safe." The room had gone quiet. Other professors had started watching, understanding they were witnessing something. Dr. Chen had looked embarrassed and angry. "Well, obviously the company disagreed with your analysis. It passed FDA review. Those trials are moving forward." The FDA review was conducted by people who didn't have access to the complete data. The complete data shows that 5% of patients will develop severe liver damage. Then why is it proceeding? Because 30% of cancer patients getting better looks better in press releases than 5% of cancer patients getting cirrhosis, even though they're the same 5%. After the guests left, Eva had sat on her couch in silence. Adam stood by the window, staring at the city below. "You could stop the trials," Eva said finally. "You could go to the FDA. You could tell them. I already tried that. I was fired, blacklisted. No one will listen. But what if I helped you? I have credibility. I have resources. I could—" "Eva, I appreciate this, but I've already failed. The treatment is out there. The system is broken. Me fighting one more time won't change the outcome. So you just accept it? You accept that you have the information to save lives, and you do nothing?" Adam turned to face her. "I've already spent years destroying myself over this. I can't do it again. I can't spend the rest of my life fighting a system that was designed to defeat people like me. Maybe that makes me a coward, but I need to live, Eva. I need to choose the people I care about over the people I might save. I need to choose you." He hadn't meant to say that last part. It slipped out in the silence and honest space between them. Eva's face shifted. Confusion, then understanding, then fear. "You don't love me," she said. "You love the idea of me. You love that I'm not like everyone else, that I'm flawed in ways you understand. That's not, it is. And I don't know if I love you, or if I'm just using you as an escape from my own life. I don't know if what I feel is real, or if it's just admiration for someone I've put on a pedestal. I used to put you on a pedestal. Now I'm doing it to you." Adam crossed the space between them. "Then let's figure it out together. Not as professor and custodian, not as two people competing to be better than the other, just as Adam and Eva, two people who are lost and maybe can help each other find the way." She let him hold her. In the darkness of her loft, with the city lights spreading across the windows like constellation maps, they held each other, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eva felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen. What followed was the slow, complicated process of actually building something real between them. Not the passionate love of movies, but the deeper love of two people learning to trust each other despite their fears. Eva took time off from teaching. She resigned from the university. The decision shocked everyone. Why would someone give up a position at Hartwell? But Eva had realized that the position, the title, the authority, none of it was feeding her. It was just another way to avoid admitting she was empty inside. The resignation letter had been one sentence: "I am leaving to pursue work that actually matters." She used her wealth and her credibility to try to help Adam. She hired lawyers, a woman named Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, who specialized in pharmaceutical fraud cases and who had a reputation for being relentless and principled. She hired consultants who could interpret the data and explain it to FDA officials in ways that made the danger undeniable. She gathered the evidence about the cancer treatment and began building a case that could go to the FDA and media. Adam initially resisted. He'd spent 2 years trying to heal by accepting that he couldn't change anything. The idea of reopening the wound, of fighting again, seemed like asking him to set himself on fire twice. "I can't do this," he'd told her. "Not again. I know what it costs." Eva had been firm with him in a way she'd never been before. Firm not out of dominance, but out of love. "You're right. You can't do this alone. That's why I'm going to do it with you. And yes, it's going to be hard. And yes, there might be consequences. But Adam, if we don't do this, who will? Those people who were harmed, they deserve vindication. Those people who might be harmed in the future, they deserve protection. And you deserve the chance to know that you tried, that you didn't stay silent a second time." But he also couldn't live with complete silence anymore. Over several conversations late into the night, Adam came to understand that Eva needed to do this as much as he did. Fighting for what was right wasn't just about saving future patients. It was about Eva learning to value integrity over achievement, to care about helping rather than winning. "You're not doing this for them," Adam said one night, holding her while she drafted an email to FDA officials. "You're doing this for you, to prove you're different from the system that created you. And that's okay. We're both doing this for selfish reasons. We're both doing it because we need to believe we can be better." Eva had looked up from her laptop, and her expression had been clear and honest. "I'm doing this for all three things. I'm doing it for the patients. I'm doing it for you. And I'm doing it for me, because I need to know that I can be someone other than what I was. I need to know that when given the choice between power and principle, I can choose principle." The process had taken months. Eva and Patricia had built a meticulous case, gathering every document, every email, every memo that demonstrated Blackwell Dynamics' knowledge of the liver damage risk. They'd interviewed former researchers who were willing to testify. They documented the parallel between what happened with Adam's data and what happened in the actual trials. The case grew larger as more evidence emerged. The case became a media story. A mathematics professor turned businesswoman and a custodian with a PhD fighting a biotech company over cancer treatment safety. Eva was back in the spotlight, but this time she didn't enjoy it the way she once might have. She realized that fame had been an addiction, and she was trying to quit. The spotlight felt like heat that would burn if you got too close. She'd given interviews, been photographed, watched herself become a symbol of virtue and whistleblower protection. But the more famous she became, the more she understood that this fame meant nothing compared to the simple act of Adam holding her hand. The FDA launched an investigation. They subpoenaed documents, deposed executives, examined protocols. Blackwell Dynamics, facing potential criminal charges and massive civil liability, decided to settle rather than fight. The company agreed to reformulate the cancer treatment with the adjusted protocol that actually worked. The next generation of the therapy began trials with safety profiles that matched Adam's original predictions. 342 people had received the dangerous original treatment before it was pulled from use. 48 had developed severe liver damage. 3 had died. Those 3 people couldn't be brought back. Their families couldn't be healed. But future patients could be protected. Future generations could receive treatment that didn't harm them. In the weeks after the settlement was finalized, Adam found himself in a strange place emotionally. He'd expected vindication to feel like victory. Instead, it felt hollow. The 3 people who died were still dead. Their families were still devastated. Winning a legal battle against a company that had prioritized profit over safety didn't change the fact that he'd stayed silent for so long. It didn't erase the 2 years he'd spent as a janitor when he could have been fighting. He'd attended one of the settlement hearings and had seen a woman in the courtroom gallery, a woman who looked like she'd been hollowed out from the inside. Her name was Margaret Sutton, and her husband Richard had been one of the 3 people who died from the treatment. She'd come to listen to the company admit, in legal terms, that they'd known about the danger. Adam had approached her after the hearing. "I'm so sorry," he'd said. "I was the researcher who discovered the liver damage. I should have fought harder to stop this." She'd looked at him for a long moment, and then she'd done something that had broken him completely. She'd cried, and then she'd thanked him. "You stood up," she'd said. "You could have stayed quiet and gotten paid and forgotten about it. But you didn't. And even though Richard is gone, even though this settlement can't give me my husband back, knowing that you tried matters, knowing that you fought for principle matters. My husband would want to know that his death changed something, that it led to safer treatment for future patients. That's what he'd want." Eva understood Adam's guilt without needing him to explain it. One evening she found him sitting in their backyard, staring at nothing. She sat beside him and took his hand. "You're thinking about Margaret," she said. "I'm thinking about all the ways I failed," he replied. "Failed them. Failed myself. Failed the system when I quit instead of fighting. I could have saved Richard Sutton's life if I'd been braver, smarter, more resourceful." "Stop," Eva said firmly. "That's not truth. That's the guilt talking, and guilt is a liar. You did what you could do in the moment with the resources you had. You chose to protect your sanity and your life. There's no shame in that. And then, when you could do more, you did. That's not failure, that's courage. And Richard Sutton's wife understands that. She's not angry at you. She's grateful." Adam had told her then about Margaret's reaction. "See," Eva had said, "you changed the system. You protected people who haven't even been born yet. That's not nothing. That's everything." Adam wanted to believe her. Some days he did. Other days he still felt the weight of the 3 deaths, the weight of the nearly 5 years of silence. But slowly, over months, that weight transformed from something that crushed him into something he could carry, not with ease, but with purpose. Adam stood in a courtroom as the settlement was announced, watching Ava talk to reporters about the importance of research ethics and the power of whistleblowers. She spoke about the courage it took to say no. She spoke about the system's tendency to punish people who exposed problems rather than punish the problems themselves. She spoke carefully, without revealing too much about Adam's personal struggle, allowing him to remain partially in the shadows, even as his work was being vindicated. He felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. Not the empty achievement of climbing a ladder that led nowhere, but the genuine satisfaction of having helped, of having been part of something bigger than himself, of knowing that lives would be spared because he'd finally been brave enough to act. But the legal victory wasn't the story's ending. It was just the beginning of the real part, figuring out how to live in a world that had been radically changed, how to move forward from vindication into actual life, how to build something that mattered instead of just exposing what didn't. 6 months after the settlement, Adam was offered a position at a different biotech firm, one that had heard about his story and wanted to hire him specifically because of his commitment to ethics. The salary was substantial. The work was meaningful. For the first time since leaving Boston, he was being asked to return to his field, not as penance, but as redemption. He turned it down. "Why?" Ava asked, genuinely shocked. "This is what you wanted. This is vindication." "No," Adam said. "It's tempting, but it's not what I want. I want to work with you." Ava had left the biotech world entirely and was starting a non-profit dedicated to independent research integrity and ethics oversight. She was using her wealth to fund research scientists who'd been blacklisted for doing the right thing. She was building a system designed to catch the situations that had destroyed Adam's career before they could destroy others. "I can't pay you what you'd make in industry," Eva warned. "I know. I don't care. I want to build something with you that matters." So that's what they did. They worked side by side, Eva handling the business and administrative side, while Adam oversaw the research integrity protocols. They moved into a small house outside of Millbrook, near where Adam's sister still lived. They adopted a second dog. They stopped trying to prove anything and started trying to understand each other. A year into the non-profit work, Adam proposed on a hill overlooking the town they'd both fled and then chosen to return to. He used a simple ring, platinum, no diamonds, just clean lines. Eva cried, which surprised them both because she thought she'd lost the capacity for that kind of pure emotion. "I'll marry you," she said, "not because you solved an equation, because you didn't, and it didn't matter." The wedding took place in a field outside Millbrook with about 60 people. Adam's sister gave him away. Eva's parents came, and her mother had whispered to her that she'd never seen her look so genuinely happy, which was either a compliment or a criticism, depending on how you heard it. They wrote their own vows. Adam spoke about finding redemption, not in achieving something great, but in choosing to do something kind. He spoke about falling in love with a woman who'd taught him that intelligence could serve others rather than dominate them. He spoke about second chances and roads that led back home. Eva spoke about discovering that the equation didn't matter. All the problems she'd spent her life solving had been designed to have answers. But the real problems, how to live meaningfully, how to love without fear, how to matter in a way that sustained rather than destroyed, couldn't be solved through intellect alone. They required wisdom, and wisdom came from living honestly. 2 years after they met in that classroom, Adam and Eva stood in the morning light of their house in Millbrook, making coffee together. Outside, their dogs played in the yard, Beethoven, now grey around the muzzle, and a younger dog named Darwin, who they'd rescued 6 months after getting together. Ava's research integrity non-profit had expanded to 4 locations across 3 states. Adam was training other researchers in ethical frameworks, and mentoring young scientists who'd been damaged by systems that prioritized profit over principle. They were building a life that looked small from the outside, but felt infinitely large on the inside. They'd created a real home. Not the sterile loft Eva had owned before, but a place that reflected both of them. There were stacks of books on every surface: philosophy, literature, scientific papers, art books. There was a small garden that they maintained together, growing vegetables and herbs, not for efficiency, but for the simple pleasure of tending something living. There were photographs on the walls of people they loved: Adam's sister Sarah, Marcus, colleagues from the non-profit, researchers they'd helped. It was a home built not on achievement, but on connection. "Do you ever regret it?" Eva asked Adam one morning, handing him a mug of coffee. "Leaving your career?" "Every day," he said, which wasn't what she expected to hear. "Not because I want to go back, but because I regret the way it happened. I regret not fighting harder, not trusting myself more, not believing I could have made a difference when it mattered most." Eva set down her coffee and took his face in her hands. "But you did make a difference. You're making one now. You're doing the work that matters most. A smaller one than I could have made in industry. Maybe in scale, but also a deeper one in every other way. You're not saving thousands of cancer patients with a miracle drug that might or might not work. You're changing the system that decides how thousands of cancer patients get treated. You're teaching future researchers that ethics isn't optional. You're preventing the next version of Blackwell dynamics from existing. You're showing young people that you can choose integrity over advancement. That's not smaller. That's foundational. That's the work that actually matters." Adam pulled her close. This was the real victory, not the settlement or the media attention, but this: standing in a kitchen with someone who understood him, building something together that neither of them could have built alone. They'd learned that love wasn't about merging into one person. It was about becoming more fully yourself through the presence of another. Adam had become more kind through Eva. Eva had become more human through Adam. They'd both become better. "And you?" he asked. "Do you miss it? The university, the research, the spotlights?" Eva thought about this honestly, the way she'd learned to think about everything. "Sometimes I miss the clarity of it, having a problem that could be solved on a whiteboard in elegant formulas, having a system that measures you against clear metrics and rewards you for being the smartest person in the room." She paused, sipping her coffee. "But mostly I don't. Mostly I like being the person who makes it possible for smart people to do good work. It's like what Marcus told you. I'm the foundation now. I'm the invisible structure that holds everything up. And I'm okay with that. More than okay. I'm happy with it. And I never thought I'd say that about anything." They'd visited Marcus before he retired from Hartwell. He'd invited them to his small apartment in Millbrook, and they'd sat in his living room while he made tea, and they talked about life and meaning and the choices we make. He'd held their hands, an older man blessing two younger people who'd found their way, and told them he was proud of both of them. "Eva, you've finally understood that intelligence is just one way of being in the world. It's not the best way. It's not the only way that matters. Being smart is good, but being kind is better. Being brilliant is useful, but being present is irreplaceable. You're learning that now, and it's making you more powerful than you ever were when you were just using your mind." Then he'd turn to Adam. "And you finally forgave yourself. I've watched you carry the weight of those 3 people who died for so long. But you've accepted that you can't carry guilt for the whole world. You can only do the work in front of you. And the work in front of you is good. The people you're helping are real. The change you're creating is real. That's more than most people ever accomplish." "The system broke you both," Marcus had said, looking at them together. "It broke Eva by seducing her with achievement. It broke Adam by punishing him for integrity. But you found each other, and instead of being broken together, you're healing together. That's the real victory. That's not just what matters. That's everything that matters. After Marcus retired, they stayed in touch. He'd call to check in, or they'd visit for coffee on Saturday mornings. He became a grandfather figure to them, someone who'd lived through enough to know what was real and what was just performance. And slowly, over time, the guilt Adam carried began to ease. Not disappear. True guilt, deserved guilt, never completely disappears. But it transformed from something that crushed him into something he carried. Something that reminded him why the work mattered. Something that kept him honest. In the spring of that second year, Ava became pregnant. The discovery came as a shock to both of them. They'd discussed having children theoretically but hadn't been trying. When Eva took the test, she stood in their bathroom for a long time, staring at the result, unsure how she felt. Fear was her primary emotion, followed quickly by something that might have been wonder. Adam found her there and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Eva answered honestly. "Am I supposed to be thrilled about this? Because I'm terrified. What if I'm still that person underneath everything, driven and cold and incapable of putting another person's needs before my own? What if I pass that on to this child? What if I become my mother, or worse? What if I can't be a mother at all because I don't have whatever neural architecture creates maternal instinct?" "You're thinking too much," Adam said gently. "Which makes sense. You always think when you're scared. But this isn't a problem to solve with intelligence. This is just something to experience as it happens, and I'll be there. We'll figure it out together." Eva had cried then, and Adam held her while she let all her fear and uncertainty pour out. What if I fail? What if she grows up and realizes that her mother is fundamentally broken? Then she'll grow up and understand that all people are fundamentally broken, and that love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up even when you're broken. It's about learning to be human in front of another human being and letting them learn from your humanity. During her pregnancy, Ava had become unexpectedly tender. She'd read books about parenting, which was very Ava, trying to intellectualize something that couldn't be intellectualized. But slowly, she'd stopped reading the parenting books and started just being pregnant. She'd feel the baby kick and would put her hand on her belly in wonder, amazed that she contained another consciousness, another entire human being. Adam would sit with his hand on her belly, feeling Eleanor kick, and would talk to her. He'd tell her about her mother, about how smart and kind she was becoming. He'd tell her about the history of their family, about grandparents she'd never meet, about the tradition of people trying their best and often failing but getting back up anyway. Their daughter, Eleanor Rose, was born in November, a healthy, furious little girl who demanded to be fed, held and changed with the authoritative voice of someone who knew exactly what she wanted. Eva had been in labor for 17 hours, and Adam had been there for all of it, holding her hand, breathing with her, reminding her that every pain brought them closer to meeting their daughter. Adam watched Eva hold Eleanor for the first time, and he saw something transform in his wife's face. The calculated intelligence, the strategic thinking, the endless self-improvement, all of it fell away, replaced by something simpler and more profound. Eva looked at their daughter with an expression of such pure tenderness that Adam had to look away for a moment because it made him cry. Eva looked at Eleanor and she cried, and she whispered, "Hello, beautiful girl. I'm your mother. I'm so sorry I'm imperfect. I'm so sorry I'm damaged and flawed and probably not who you deserve. But I'm going to try so hard to be better for you. I'm going to try so hard to teach you how to live in a way that doesn't destroy you, the way my life nearly destroyed me." And that was when Eva understood that this was the answer to the question that had driven her entire life. She'd been searching for meaning in achievement, in recognition, in being the smartest person in every room. But meaning wasn't found in any of those places. Meaning was found in moments like this, holding a tiny human being and committing to help her become fully herself, flaws and brilliance included. Meaning was the weight of Eleanor in her arms. Meaning was the sound of Eleanor crying and knowing that she, Eva, had the power to comfort her. Meaning was this: a small person who existed because of love between her and Adam, and who trusted them to shape her world. 5 years after they met, Eva and Adam stood in the auditorium of Hartwell University, where it all began. The university had invited them to speak about research ethics and institutional responsibility. Eva wore a simple blue dress. Adam wore a button-down shirt. They stood together in front of an audience that included Dr. Kenneth Walsh, the supervisor who'd fired Adam, and the students who'd watched him solve the impossible equation. Adam began by talking about the moment he discovered the liver damage data, about the hope he'd had that the system would work, that ethical concerns would be taken seriously. He spoke about the discovery that they wouldn't, and about the cost of standing up for what was right. "I'm not going to tell you that the cost was worth it," Adam said carefully, "because the people who died, Richard Sutton, Michael Palmer, Sarah Chen, they're still dead. Their families are still devastated. I can't make a moral calculation that balances my integrity against their deaths, because those deaths shouldn't have happened in the first place. What I will tell you is that the cost was inevitable. If I'd stayed silent, if I'd participated in downplaying the data, I would have carried that knowledge for the rest of my life. And yes, I still carry the guilt of the people I couldn't save, but at least now I also carry the knowledge that I tried." Eva spoke about the mathematics of ethics, about how systems aren't designed to reward integrity. The system is designed to work smoothly. It's designed for everyone to do their job and not ask difficult questions. When you ask difficult questions, you create friction, and institutions don't like friction. They're built on the assumption that some people will be sacrificed to keep things running smoothly. The question isn't whether you'll ever face a situation where you have to choose between integrity and success. The question is how you'll make that choice. After the speech, a young student approached them. She was brilliant, she said. Her research had revealed something problematic about one of the university's most prestigious programs, specifically about the methodological integrity of some of the foundational studies the program was built on. She'd been told to keep quiet. She'd been told that her career would be destroyed if she made a fuss. She'd been told that some things were more important than absolute accuracy. She didn't know what to do. "Tell the truth," Eva said, "and know that the consequences will be real. Your advisors will be angry. You might face retaliation. People will treat you as a troublemaker, but the consequences of staying silent are real too. The only difference is that you get to decide whose cost you bear, yours or someone else's. And I'm telling you, from experience, bearing your own cost is ultimately less damaging than asking others to pay the price for your silence." "What if I end up like you?" the student asked Adam, gesturing to his ordinary clothes, his ordinary presentation. "Cleaning floors? Losing everything?" Adam smiled. "There are worse fates. I spent 2 years cleaning floors, and it was the most honest work I've ever done. But more importantly, you won't be alone in this. There are people who value integrity. There are lawyers who will help you. There are organizations dedicated to protecting whistleblowers. You won't have to do what I did, which was fight alone. We've built systems now that catch people who fall from doing the right thing. You won't be alone." He handed her a card, the address of Eva's non-profit organization. "If you decide to tell the truth, contact us. We'll help you. We'll find you resources, legal support, maybe even funding for your research. You won't have to sacrifice your career the way I did." The student took the card and looked at it for a long moment. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm seeing a problem that doesn't really exist? Then you'll be wrong, Eva said. And that's okay. Being willing to question things and then being willing to be corrected is the mark of a scientist. But the cost of being wrong is far less than the cost of staying silent and discovering later that you were right all along. The student nodded slowly, understanding that the equations were going to get much more complicated, but she also seemed lighter somehow, as if permission to choose truth had lifted something heavy from her shoulders. She would, in fact, go on to publish her findings 6 months later, after carefully documenting everything and presenting it to the university administration through proper channels. The university would, after initial resistance, admit the methodological problems and begin fixing the research program. Eva and Adam left Hartwell that afternoon and drove back to Millbrook. The road stretched ahead of them, familiar now, leading home. Eleanor was in the back seat, napping between the 2 dogs. They passed through towns they'd never given much thought to when they lived there, places that had always seemed small and confining. Now they looked different. They looked like places where people built real lives, where community mattered, where being significant to a small group of people meant more than being anonymous to millions. Eva reached over and took Adam's hand. He didn't look at her, just squeezed gently, and returned his attention to the road. This was one of the things she loved about him. He didn't need constant reassurance or validation. He was comfortable in silence with her. He was comfortable in presence. "I was thinking about what that student said," Eva told him, "about ending up like you, cleaning floors, about losing everything." "Yeah? And you know what? I realized I would have been willing to do that. If the only way to have you was to lose everything else, I would have chosen you. That's what loving you has taught me. That there are choices more important than achievement. That there are relationships more important than careers. That being fully seen and known by another person is worth more than all the accolades in the world." Adam glanced over at her and smiled. "I love you too. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you didn't have to choose. I'm glad we both ended up somewhere that worked. I'm glad we have Eleanor. I'm glad we have each other." "Me too," Eva said. She put her head on his shoulder, and they drove in comfortable silence, the highway stretching ahead of them like a promise. In their house that night, they sat on the porch with their dogs, Eleanor between them, watching the sun set over the hills they'd both tried to escape. Beethoven had become elderly and wise, his movements slower than they used to be, his grey muzzle a sign of the years they'd spent together. Darwin, the younger dog, was energetic and playful, still convinced that life was a game where everyone would win. Eleanor patted both dogs gently, the way her parents had taught her, with respect and love. The equation that had brought them together was still written somewhere, in a university classroom, on a whiteboard, in the memory of students who'd watched a janitor become genius in 40 seconds. The professor who'd taught that class, Eva, had eventually recommended Adam for a position at a consulting firm that specialized in research ethics. He'd declined, preferring to work with Eva on the non-profit, but she'd told the firm his story anyway, and 3 years later the firm had contacted him again, offering him a position as head of ethics oversight. He'd accepted, working part-time so that he could maintain his work with the non-profit and his family. His colleagues at the firm were people like him, people who'd lost careers for doing the right thing, people who understood the cost of integrity and believed it was worth paying. But the real equation was this: a woman who had everything except peace, a man who had lost everything except principles, 2 people learning that the sum of their lives was greater than the value of either life alone, not by addition, but by transformation. They'd become something neither could have been separately, a unit of genuine human connection, of love built not on passion or idealization, but on the steady recognition that the other person was real and worthy and infinitely valuable exactly as they were. The last thing Adam did before going to bed that night was send an email to a researcher he'd never met, who'd been blacklisted by Blackwell Dynamics. The researcher was considering suicide, according to a mutual friend. The email was simple and direct. Adam shared his own story and invited the researcher to apply for funding through Eva's non-profit. He didn't promise that everything would be okay. He didn't pretend that vindication would heal all wounds or that fighting back would restore what had been lost. He'd lost people to the system, and he didn't minimize that. Instead, he promised something more valuable, that he understood exactly what the researcher was feeling, that the darkness and shame and belief that life was over, he understood all of it, that there was a way forward that didn't involve disappearing. That connection existed on the other side of despair. That meaning could be built from the wreckage of broken dreams. That people existed who would value you not for your achievements, but for your integrity. The researcher replied 3 days later, saying yes. And then she accepted the grant. And then she got healthy. And then she became part of the community of ethical researchers that Eva and Adam had been building. She's still there now, 3 years later, helping other blacklisted researchers find their way back from the edge. She's learned, as Adam and Eva have, that the greatest work isn't the work that gets published in prestigious journals or makes your name famous. The greatest work is the quiet work of holding up people who are breaking. The greatest work is the community you build with other people who've been broken by systems and have decided to heal together. And that's what their life became, a series of small acts of redemption, of helping people who'd been broken by systems, of building a world where intelligence could be combined with kindness, where achievement could serve others, where coming home meant choosing to be less important so that more people could matter. Not the grand redemption of solving world problems or becoming famous for goodness, but the quiet redemption of showing up for people, of believing in second chances, of creating a space where damaged people could heal. 5 years into the non-profit, they'd helped fund research by 43 scientists who'd been blacklisted or fired for ethical stands. 8 of those scientists had gone on to publish groundbreaking research. 2 had won prestigious awards. But the real victory was that every single one of them was alive, employed, contributing to their fields in ways that made the world better. The system hadn't broken them ultimately because Eva and Adam had built a net to catch them. Eleanor grew up knowing about the equation on the blackboard. Adam told her the story over and over, how a woman had written an impossible problem, thinking no one could solve it. How a man had stepped out of the shadows and solved it anyway. How sometimes the people you think are invisible turn out to be the ones who change everything. "Did Mommy think you were stupid?" Eleanor asked once when she was 5 years old. "She thought I was invisible," Adam explained. "And sometimes being invisible teaches you things that being smart never could." Eleanor nodded solemnly, the way 5-year-olds do when they're thinking about something serious. Then she asked, "Will you teach me to be invisible too?" Adam knelt down and looked his daughter in the eye. "No. I'm going to teach you to be visible in a way that doesn't hurt people. I'm going to teach you to be brilliant and kind at the same time. That's much harder than being either one alone. But if you can do that, you'll be able to matter in ways that people who are only brilliant can never imagine." This was the legacy Adam and Eva wanted to leave. Not just their daughter, but every person they touched through their work. A reminder that intelligence is a gift, but humanity is a choice. That achievement matters, but character matters more. That the equation that really matters isn't the one on the blackboard. It's the one you live out every single day through your choices about who to help and how to love. The equation on the blackboard had been solved in 40 seconds by a man who disappeared into janitorial work to escape his own failures. But the equation of a life well lived would take forever to solve. It would require constant attention and recommitment, and the willingness to choose integrity over advancement again and again, in 1,000 small moments that no one else would ever witness. They were solving it together, Adam and Eva, with Eleanor growing up in a home where those values were modeled, reinforced and celebrated. They were solving it with every researcher they helped, with every student they mentored, with every time they chose community over achievement, connection over recognition, being fully human over being perfectly successful. The equation on the blackboard had been elegant and correct. But the real equation, the one that mattered, was this: two broken people plus the willingness to heal together, plus a commitment to use their gifts in service of others, equals a life that is genuinely, deeply, irrevocably worth living. And that equation they were solving together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of presence and kindness at a time. Not in the spotlight, not in the halls of prestigious universities, but in the quiet places where real love happens, in kitchens and on porches, in non-profit offices and research labs, in the hearts of people who'd learned that being smart enough to solve equations meant nothing if you weren't wise enough to know what problems were worth solving.